everybody. Thank you very much for joining us here today. This is Paul Taubman with 9.connects. You are in the right place if you are here for our webinar on mechanical layers revisited. So I've got a lot to cover here today. Just want to show you what my objectives are going to be. First and foremost, I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time today talking about layer color because as we were preparing for this webinar, there were a couple of things that I found that were a little unusual. And if you haven't played with it as much as I've been playing with it for the past week, you might get thrown off a little bit by it. So I'm actually going to spend some time about that here today. I'm also going to show you a very cool script that was presented to us by a fellow by the name of Randy Clemens. Randy's a good friend of mine. And you'll see why I'm going to present a little bit of this script, because Altium's done a really great job with the new features they've added in since Altium Designer 18. However, this script also picks up in some areas that Altium still needs to, I think, I'll call it an improvement at this point, but little things that they can do to kind of smooth out some of the rough edges. I'm going to definitely talk about layer pairs. It's important to know a few things about that. I'm also going to talk, well, and before I go into the next new feature that Altium's brought in, I'm going to talk about what I call the Rev 2 of 9.connects mechanical layer list. So when we first did this webinar about 2 years ago, the primary reason we did it was to introduce a mechanical layer list and to explain why we did what we had done. We've revised it, and I'll explain what we've revised. However, if you've used our original list or you've got your own, nothing to fear, because I'm going to talk about this new feature called layer types, and you can see how these things will have some compatibility with each other if you use the layer types. And then lastly, we have layer sets. So there's just a whole lot of things in here with the beginning word of layer colors, layer pairs, layer types, and layer sets. So bear with me as we go through these, and hopefully they'll all make sense here once we're done. 2 housekeeping notes for you. We will definitely have time for questions today. And then secondly, the script that I am going to show you is not our creation here at 9.connects. And then if you want, there is the link up here. So if you can write that down quickly, feel free to do so. But in addition to that, if you look in your GoToWebinar panel, I did broadcast out the exact same link in the chat box. So hopefully you can grab it there as well. If you don't see it, feel free to write a question in there, and then we can copy and paste that into the questions panel as well. So that's what we got here for you. But I would like to start off with 3 polling questions. This is the first one we're going to ask over here, so we'll get that first polling question going. And simply just would like to know what version of Altium Designer you're using. Okay, well, thank you for doing that over here. So you can see the results. So there's about 13% of you who are using Altium Designer or prior. So I'm just going to forewarn you that these features that you're going to see, as far as I know, are not necessarily available in Altium Designer 17 or prior. So at least you get to see what they've added into 18, 19, and 20. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a heads up on that. But the rest of the information I should present today should be the same, with, again, the exception of maybe the layer types. So just there's your FYI for that. So the second polling question I have is really more going to be an academic one for you. So, and the reason I'm going to ask this is because once I start explaining what's going to go on here, you're going to see where these are. Actually, I'm sorry, this is not the polling question here. The other polling question that you'll see is the question is what controls the color in the mechanical layer. And the reason I'm asking that is because you'll see what the response is, and once you understand this, then you can make some intelligent decisions as to how to handle the color. Okay, so we've got those down, and it's an interesting breakup. So believe it or not, only one of those questions is right, and I will reveal that as we go here today. So I'm writing it down here right now as to what the correct answer will be, if that's the one that you had answered. So I'm going to ask one more polling question. This one actually has to, the third one is about the names. So let's get that poll going here. Okay, so we've got that written down here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into Altium Designer, and let's start talking about layer colors. So I'm going to bring up my library over here. So just to show you what I've done, because you're going to see this throughout the webinar here today, is I have set up my mechanical layers, and I've set up their colors, and I've set up their names, and I've done it in a library. So this is actually a library component. And what I did over here, just so that we would be able to follow these things as we move them through the webinar here today, what I did was I inverted a text box. And so if I click on the text box over here in the panel, you can see that it actually has 2 lines. So one of the features that they've added in recently, and I think it was introduced in 18, is that if you hold down your Alt and hit Enter, you can actually get multiple lines in the text. And that's exactly what I did over here. So the first line over here on the top, hopefully you can read it, is just to give where it initially started from. And then after I did the Alt Enter and I typed in the word currently, I'm using what's called a special parameter. So in the PCB side, those are started with a dot. And if you ever want to see all of those, you just click on this little X here and you can see all the ones that Altium has. So if you use any of these over here, what you're asking Altium to do is to put its information in there depending on what you're asking for. So if you ask for a whole count, it's going to give you a number. If I put a layer name in there, it's going to tell you what layer it's sitting on. So that's what I did over here, so that'll make it a little bit easier for us to follow along. Now, when I take this component and I bring it into a PCB dock, all right, let's see what happens with it over here, right? Because one of the questions you may have had is like, well, you know, of course, the question we asked here is what's going to happen with the color and what's going to happen with the layers and the names. Let's take a look at what happens with that. So for those who maybe, I think everybody here is pretty familiar with Altium Designer. If anybody happens to be slightly new with it, we would not normally put a footprint directly into the PCB. We would normally do that through a schematic, and then through the schematic, we would do an ECO and that footprint would be added in automatically. For the purposes of what we're doing here today, I'm skipping the whole ECO process and I'm just putting the footprint in directly here. So I'm going to click on component and I am going to go into my library. And let's go into library A here. And I'm going to drop this part in. So I'll do a right click in here and I'm going to place this. Now notice something about my cursor. There's nothing on it. So I don't have anything on my copper layers. Normally you'd see something from the copper layers, but when I open this this PCB project, none of the layers are turned on. As a matter of fact, just to verify that, I'm going to click on View Configuration. Notice there are no mechanical layers that are turned on here. Okay. There's just none. So if I go again back to my component, I right click on this component and I place it. Right now, it's not going to automatically turn on the layers. It's going to do it once I place the part. So I'm going to click down here. It's going to take a moment and now it's going to drop it. I'm going to right click here because I'm not going to drop another part. And there is my massive component. If we go back to View Configuration, okay, notice that any names that I had created here in the library, so let's split the screen here so we can see this. If I go over here and I do a split vertical and we look at our library A and we go to our View Configuration, these are all the names that I gave it. But if we go over here to our PCB dock, none of the names came through. And for some reason it is picking up on this, but I think that's because during my practice runs, I had some stuff that came from something called library A. So when these got turned back on again, it just happened to memorize it. But that may be a residual of this PCB dock. The point I'm trying to make over here is the names themselves from the library into the PCB dock did not propagate. So to answer the second question, those people who had said, the 41% of you said that the names are being held by the document, that is correct. So that's something to, we'll talk about here in just a moment, how we can take what we've got over here and actually push those over into the PCB dock side. This in the past has been a huge frustration, even for us here at 9.Connects, because if we were splitting up a library and we didn't have this established to be from the get-go, then we would actually have to type these things again, or we'd have to do something where we actually clone the original one and copy and paste the components from one library to another. So it was very administratively heavy in that sense. But I'll show you something in a minute that Altium's added that will make that much simpler. So that's the point I wanted to make over here, is that when these came in, they came in on the right layers, there's no doubt. And if we match these up, you can see the color codes are all the same, okay? But when it came to the, and by the way, they came on the correct layers as well, but the namings that we had given these, or these labels we gave them, did not come in. Now let me talk a little bit about the color. So what happens quite often is that we change a color somewhere and then later on not realized it, but we've actually changed it everywhere else. And just to demonstrate that here, and this is what I literally did in order to discover this, I would say, well, what happens if I change all these colors to be the same? Now, in a design practice, this is really rare because obviously we want different colors so that it's a little easier to determine where things are and which layers. But I put all of these here to be red. If I go over here to library A, here's where it gets interesting. All these did turn red, okay? So to answer the second question of the polling, the 38 of you who said that this is controlled by the system is correct. So the names of these things are controlled by the document, the colors are controlled by the system. Now, what makes it even more complex is that you'll notice that even though these things are now recognized as red, for some reason, these are not necessarily updating automatically. So I've tried to do things like click into them and zoom in and zoom out, and they don't seem to automatically take up the new color, though it is interesting that if you go into the properties, they are, if the property recognizes it as being red here as well. If I was to go into the library and I close this, by the way, notice that again, this is not a document thing because it didn't ask me to save it, right? It just closed it because there was nothing to save here. Now, if I bring it up again, guess what happens? Now this gets updated properly and these things are now showing as red. So I think that trips up a lot of people because obviously you're not gonna, what I'm showing here today from a demonstration purpose is not normally what you'd necessarily do from, let's say, a design purpose, right? If you're working in the libraries, usually you work in the libraries, you're working in the design, you're working in the design, you wouldn't probably be operating this way, so this would not be obvious to you. You'd probably change a color, and then later on you open it up and you say, well, why did that color change? I didn't change it in this layer. Well, it did get changed, it just didn't happen until you actually refreshed it, and that seems to be done by doing a close and reopen. So how do we control the colors here? If we go up to the preferences in the top right-hand corner, so for those folks in 17 and 18, in Altium 18, 19, and 20, your preferences are now in the top right corner over here. I am going to go into the PCB editor and I'm going to go into something called layer colors. Now, what's interesting about layer colors over here is that the names here can throw you off because you'd think that, well, aren't these the names? Are these names not being saved in here? And the answer is no. All these names do is they reflect whatever the active editor is that you are looking at. So for example, I'm looking at the library editor over here, and because the library editor is open and has these open, that's why they show these. If I open up another editor and I have something completely different, and that's the active editor, when I open this preference, these are the, whatever that has, that's what's gonna show up here. This is strictly for color. Okay, that's the point I wanna make very clear here. This is strictly for color. So what can we do about the color? Well, first and foremost, if you have a color set that you like, from the get-go, you better save it. And how do we do that? We can click on Save Color Profile over here, and it's gonna dump it into some place called View Configurations. I am gonna copy this because I'm gonna need to bring my other one back over here. You can see that I've already created one. What's interesting is that if I do save it, and then later on I need to repair this, because once I make that change, it dynamically changes it here. Right, and you see that right here. By me changing this in the PCB dock, it instantly changed it in the color profile. So how do I fix that? Well, what I got to do here is I got to do load color palette, and in this case, it did bring me here. Sometimes it dumps me into my root directory, so that's why I copied the view configuration path. But I am going to bring up my 9.connects one. I'm going to press open. Now, if you're not careful, what you probably didn't see here was that it added something to the color profiles. And what I was doing when I was initially looking into this, I was just pressing OK and it wasn't changing it. I actually do have to select the color profile, and then I can press apply or OK. Again, by pressing apply, you get a preview without closing it. You'll notice now that these colors have changed. I'll press OK. And fortunately, these also changed as well. So the summary I can make over here, again, to really drive this point home, when it comes to the names, those names are based on the document. When it comes to the colors, it's based on the system preferences. Now let's get back to an issue that you probably got in the back of your mind saying, well, how do we fix this mess over here? Well, fortunately, Altium's added something in which I really, really like. It's the ability to import and export your layers. And if you do it in the library, you can export it out and you can bring it into your PCB layout and vice versa as well. So the command set's under tools and it exists in both the library editor and the PCB editor as well. So that's what we're going to make use of over here. So to export, I just have to right click here and let me jump over here to my, there we go. So we see where these are. And I've created a few of them. I'm going to be using them throughout the webinar here today. But they are a dot stack up. So that's where they're going to be saved here. I'm not going to save this one, obviously, because it's a mess. But what I can do here is I can go into tools and I'm going to import it. And once I go into the import, and again, let's go here to this directory, I am going to take what I call the Rev2 stack up because this is the latest and greatest revision of 9.connect's recommended layer set. So I'm going to press open on that and boom, it's now in. So that should now save you the hassle of having to retype in all of these things. And now this matches up. So if you've got one of those situations where you're in a company and you do establish this list and you save it off, now it's really simple to bring these things in. And by the way, they don't have to be all turned on as well. So if I do a file new, let's do a file new PCB. So a new PCB won't have anything in it here because I'm not using some predefined type here. It always has a default mechanical 1, and that's fine. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to now import this in again. So I'm going to go into tools and I'm going to import the mechanical layers, and again do the stack up, press open, and it also opens those and it defines them now. So it's all good to go. So that's what you can make use of. If you are a contractor or somebody who does services, this works, by the way, really great for companies that have well-defined procedures. This is our mechanical layer list. If you're going to create a new library, you're going to create a new PCB doc, import this in, you're done. Great, it works fine. If you happen to be someone who is doing service work for other people, and this is subject to change because you're trying to adhere to the customer stuff, then what I can do is I'm going to show you some scripts that were introduced to us here at 9.connect. So Randy Clemens was kind enough to provide it to us. He has helped modify this script. In fact, I've got it up over here. But a fellow by the name of Pitar Perisin and Brett Miller were the ones who seemed like they put the most work into it. I've never met these two individuals, but I thank them for it because I think it's a really cool script. And I'm going to show you how to run the script and what these 4 features do within the script in case it's of any interest to you. And again, if you go to your GoToMeeting panel, I have left a link in there that you can copy it. You can take it off the Altium forum. All right, so how do we work this? Well, I have this open here. So if you grab it, there's a PRJSRC project file, and there's a .pas file. The .pas is what's really got to be open because that's the actual script itself. So how do we work it? We want to be in the active. In fact, I'll go here into, well, I'll just use PCB1 for grins. Doesn't matter which one I do, but I will be in the active document here, and I will go into file, and about halfway down, I'll run the script, and it's going to come up with the 4 scripts that are available. So the first one that I'm going to show you over here is I will show you the export. So they also have an export and import feature similar to what Altium has, but there's a little caveat to this that I think you'll like, especially if you're setting these things up. Where one thing about the Altium one is, and I'll explain why that is. In the Altium one, it didn't matter what you have over here, if you import something, it will blow it all away and it will import what you gave it. This one's a little more forgiving, and I'll demonstrate that here in a moment. So I'm going to export this out, and I'm going to press OK. It's not called a stack file, it's called an INI file. So here is the file here. I'll just overwrite this one, that's perfectly fine because it's the exact same one I was going to demonstrate anyways. So now that I've got that in here, the other script that I'll run, so you got to keep going back to the file run script, but hopefully you'll find that the few minutes you spend on this is going to save you quite a bit of time. I'm also going to reset the mechanical layers, and I'm going to press OK. And one of the things that a lot of people have complained about in Altium 18, 19, and 20 is that unlike 17 and prior, you don't have this list already open for you. If you wanted to create a new mechanical layer, you got to right click, and then you've got to say, OK, I'm going to add mechanical layer. Here, that script instantly opened up 64 of them. I believe the total number of mechanical layers available is like 1023. If you need that many mechanical layers, I think there's something wrong with your processes, to be perfectly honest with you. But nevertheless, now these are all open. The other thing that's important too is it doesn't blow away the information that was in here, which is a good thing as well. It's just hiding things. Now, I don't have something that's up here, but let's demonstrate this, make sure we're clear about this. So if I go over here and I run the script again, so let's run the run script, and let's reset the mechanical layers. And again, it's going to reset them all, but it didn't blow them away. It just hid them. So if I start turning these things back on, you'll see that the information is still there. Though I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, one thing I have found is that you really don't want to be mucking with layers halfway through your design. You really want to make sure that this is well established before you really get into anything deep. So just please take that word of advice, because things can happen. But nevertheless, they are all over here. So what do I want to do to get my names in here without blowing away or turning off the other mechanical layers? Well, I can now again use the script. So if I go here into file run script here, And if I say, okay, I want to import my mechanical layer information, and I hit my INI file, and now you'll see that it will put in my information here, but it leaves the other ones here available for me to make use of. And finally, when I'm done with it, the last part of the script here, I just simply go into the run script, because I don't want all 64 of these things open. It's going to be a bit of a hassle. So I want to turn off those where they're unused. And I just need to click on hide unused mechanical layers. I press OK. And now anything that has not been used has been turned off. So again, if you need to or want to play with that script, it's available to you. So that's what I want to say about that. What I want to do now is I want to move on to layer pairs. So let me before I do anything else, I want to close these because I don't want to have libraries available that aren't associated to this particular project. So we'll close those up here. We don't need to save that. And we'll close that. And I will now open up my layer pair here for this. You'll notice again that there's nothing here for mechanical layers. You'll see why here in just a moment. And let's go over here to library A. Okay, so what's the idea behind layer pairs? Very simply, the idea is that if you have something on the top and you want to push it over to the bottom, usually you also dedicate a mechanical layer for that feature, one mechanical layer for the top and one mechanical layer for the bottom. And Altium certainly recognizes that. So how do you do that here in 18, 19, and 20? Because it's a little bit different from the prior versions of it. Up here in the panels, you'll see this thing called component layers. And what Altium did, and I thought this was kind of smart of them, is they said, look, the overlay, the solder paste, the solder and the solder mask and the solder paste are all layered pairs. You have a top and you have a bottom. So why don't we create this thing called layer pair? And anything that we create as a layer pair for mechanical layers can end up in here as well. So how do I create it? Well, one thing you don't want to look for when you do this is you don't want to look for mechanical layer pair because it doesn't exist. What it is add component layer pair. So just be aware of that. And it doesn't matter if you do it on the top here or if you do it in the mechanical layer list itself. They both have it available. I'm going to click on that. And now it's going to ask for a name and it's going to ask for a layer number, both the top and the bottom, and it's going to ask for layer type. We're going to hold off on the layer type until I do a little more discussion about the differences between the Rev 1 mechanical layers 9 dot introduced and our new Rev 2, and then you'll understand where the layer types become really useful. So just bear with that. You don't have to have the layer type anyways in order for this to work. So in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 13 and 14, and I'm going to call this one 3D body, and I will give it the numbers 13 and 14. And when I press OK, boom, there it is. They've now removed 13 and 14 from the mechanical layers and now showing them as component layer pairs. Now, that's fine and dandy. The question is, will this information propagate over when I push this into the PCB? Let's try it. So I'm going to go here into layer pairs. And by the way, I'll save this here. So let's save my layer A library here. So I'm going to go back into layer pairs, and now I'm going to open components, and I'm going to go into my library. It's called library A, and here it is, my library A mech pairs again, and I'm going to place the part. So again, there's nothing going to be on there because this is a new PCB dock. It doesn't have any mechanical layers defined except for one. I'm going to right click so we don't drop another one here, and let's look at the view configuration. What do you notice here? In the view configuration, the pairs do not come up because the pairs are driven by the PCB dock. If those pairs already existed, they would have found their way into them, but they did not exist, and it's not going to force the PCB dock to take those pairs, which kind of makes sense if you think about it, because yes, if you had one single library or if all your libraries were in sync with each other, you would not really have any issues with that. But if you had different libraries come from different places, you really wouldn't want a library that's coming from a different or a third-party group to be starting to muck with your component layer pairs here. So that's kind of what happens with that. By the way, the import-export tool can easily import and export your layer pairs too. So if you have them all set up and you export them and you bring them in, they will definitely bring in your layer pairs as well. One of the things I need to bring, there's two things I want to bring to your attention. One of them is just a word of caution. As told to me by Randy, and I'm going to take his word for it. I didn't have enough time to check it out. One of the things he wanted to make clear to anybody doing this is you don't want to start doing layer pairs with things already on the bottom. So it will mess you up a bit. What you want to do is make sure that this is well established and then move things over to the bottom. But the second thing, and this is a little more important that you better hear me out on, if I'm going to create a layer pair here. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say add component layer pair. And I am going to create one for just for grins. It really doesn't matter. You'll see where I'm going with this anyway. So again, I'll make one for 13 and 14. And I will press OK. So here we go. We've got 13 and 14 that is up here. What if I made a mistake and I don't want this to be paired anymore? Unfortunately, if I go over here and I right click, the only option I have is to delete the layer. Now, by the way, as a side note, if I try to delete this layer, guess what it's going to complain about? Component primitives and cannot be removed. This has been in Altium since day one. It's a protection. And if I ever want to get something from the component layer, if I actually want to, let's say, remove a mechanical layer, and it's all it takes is just one component to have it. If that component has that mechanical layer, you've got to go back into the library, make the change necessary, push it back over through an update, and then you can remove the layer. Okay, so just be aware of that. But however, if I did have stuff that was on here from a board level, it would actually get blown away. So how can you fix this? Well, there's ways of doing it now in the script that's been provided to us that I just showed you. However, there's another mechanism we've come up with here that will work as well. So if you find yourself where you've really got to decouple these things, but at the same time you want to preserve them, the way you can do this is I'm going to introduce two dummy layers. So I'm going to add mechanical layer and we'll just call this one obviously 17. And I'm going to right click again. I'm going to add another mechanical layer. This will be 18. So I now have 17 and 18 over here. But I can go into the paired layer and I can right click here and I can edit this layer. And I'm going to say, all right, this one's going to be 17 and this one is now going to be 18. I press OK. It now makes 17 and 18 there, but it preserved my 13 and 14, which is what I wanted. And then afterwards, I can take this and delete the layer. So be careful about coupling any of these things together, because once you've done it, breaking them apart is not a trivial task. We don't want you to lose information. So that's what we've got with that. I am going to bring back my my PowerPoint here. So, and the reason why is because I'm going to ask you a polling question. And let's go here from the current slide and let's jump into this. So we're going to go into another question here, and that's going to lead us into our discussion about what we've made changes to in our recommended mechanical list. So does your company or service have a defined mechanical layer set? And is it yes and it's enforced, or yes but it's a nice recommendation as far as most of the engineers are concerned or designers, or yes but our outside customers override us, or no, you simply don't have one? All right, so the poll is closed over here. I'm actually surprised that a lot of you don't have one that's predefined, but that's okay, because we're going to show you a couple of things here, and hopefully you'll take what you think is going to be best for you. And for the others who did say yes, it's good. That's a good sign that you guys have that. To me, that's always one of the key things when you're dealing with library footprints. But let's get on with this over here. So what I'm going to show you here are the mechanical layers. So this list over here that you see on the left is the one that we proposed 2 years ago, and it's got 19 layers in it. The new one that we're proposing here is got a few less layers. Now, does that mean that you should never use these here anymore? The answer is no. If you think they're of value to you, then obviously you can use them. And Altium created 1,023 new layers. In the past, it used to be 16. They moved to the 32, and now and they went to 64, and now I think it's now 1023. So they're constantly adding more layers to make available. The only concern I always have with that is if you have that many layers, it just becomes more of an administrative task to create new parts and to manage that type of thing. But nevertheless, they've made those things available. So let me talk about the differences between what you see over here versus what you see here in our newly proposed one. Okay, so one of the things that we did was remove the layers that the Draftman tool can handle better. So when we first created our list here, this Rev1 list, we put in things that we felt could be useful to somebody who had nothing more than a Gerber file set. And as a matter of fact, this list kind of got derived that way. So the little backstory to this was that several years ago, a company came to us and they had had a number of mergers and acquisitions. They they had designs all over the place. Some of them were complete, some of them were not, some of them just simply Gerbers, some of them in different tools and whatnot. And so they tasked us with this, clean up our 50 plus designs and get them all organized and make sure that we have everything we need in our Gerbers so that if this ever happens again, at least they'll be a little bit more organized in the future. So that's why we added in things like the stack details, the bomb, and the drill. Well, sure enough, Altium comes out with Draftsman, and Draftsman, as far as I'm concerned, handles stack details, bomb, and drill far, far better than what you can ever do in the mechanical layers. So that's one of the things that we removed in there. There we go. So we also removed layers that were already represented. So the reason we said that is that we had a silk top and a silk bottom. Well, obviously we already have a silk layer. And the reason we did add this in here is so that we could add additional information regarding just the silk itself without having to put it on other layers. So if you want that, for example, it's like, well, I don't actually want to put it on the silk because it'll actually become silk, but I want mechanical layers that are dedicated so that if I want to put some more information about the silk on the silk layer, I can do that without harming the actual silk layer. We didn't feel that was really necessary. That could probably be placed in notes that we have up here. So that was what we removed. And then we also removed the bottom border template because the bottom border template is kind of redundant. With Altium's print capabilities, you can print the mirrored version, but at the same time keep the top template. So that's why we removed that one. And we also consolidated what we call board details with the board dimensions. So what we had was 2 layers dedicated for board dimension information, but we also had 2 of them for board details. And what the board details were is if we brought any 3D into the board that weren't a part of the component, that we had these for the top and the bottom. But be perfectly honest with you, there is already one for the component, and we don't really even use the component mechanical layers for any type of manufacturing documentation, so that these 3Ds can be also, that these 3Ds that we pull into the board that are not a part of a component can be put on the 3D body mechanical layer. So that's why we remove those as well. Okay, so in addition to those changes, what we did was we grouped the layers based on purpose. Let me jump back up here for a minute so you can see this, because if you look here, some of these are based on PCB, some of these are based on library, and they got kind of mishmashed in with each other. So what we said was, let's make sure we put the PCB ones together, and let's put those that are specifically related to the library or component together, and that's what we did here. So we grouped them based on library or based on their layout needs. We also matched up with Altium's default layer. So when we first did this over here, I'm sorry, let me bounce this back over here. You do have things like the assembly and the courtyards, and you also have them for, we call them mechanical layer. We didn't call them 3D bodies, we call them component mechanical top and bottom. But these really weren't matching up to, I think the assemblies and the courtyards are matching up, but they weren't really matching up to Altium's content vault. And that means you would had to have moved them. So we said, well, why don't we, if someone is going to start from one of those type of libraries, where they're pulling it from Octopart or they're pulling it from the Altium Content Central, let's kind of keep to their convention there to save a little bit of a hassle. Though to be perfectly honest with you, in 18, 19, and 20, the ability to just do a select all, go into the panel, and change the layer on it is really quick and easy. So it's not that big of an issue. And so here we go. So we grouped it based on the purpose, and then we also matched Altium's default layers. So 13, 14 are Altium's 3D bodies, 11, 12 is Altium's assembly, and 15, 16 are the courtyards. So that is how we set up this thing over here. So let me bail out of my design here, and it's going to take me to the next feature that I want to show you, and that is this thing called global names. And again, I'm going to close these up so we don't confuse them with what I'm going to show you here in a moment. All right, so let's go into our global names. This one I've already set up because I felt it would be a little bit easier for you to see, but I'm also going to bring up my libraries. Here's the Rev 1, and here's the Rev 2. So the Rev 1 looks a little bit different. So this is what we did here with this. And then here's the Rev 2, which we've kind of seen all along here at this point. So what we did over here is we obviously set this view configuration based on mechanical 1. But what we also did, and you'll see these things that are in parentheses over here, is now we're using this thing that they call the layer types. So you may have noticed that if I go here and I edit the layer, you see this thing that's called layer type. And Altium has predefined a number of these layers. They're universal layers. And what's powerful about these universal layers is that when you establish them and you bring these into another document, it will move it automatically to the right mechanical layer. Now, let me talk a little bit more about the layer sheet here for a moment, and then I'll demonstrate to you how this worked. So if you go into this drop down over here, by the way, you can't create your own, which I kind of hope they'll do at some point because there's a few that I would like to have here. But what they do is they give you a list over here, and as you keep selecting from that list, the list actually gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So if I go over here to the silk bottom over here and I say edit the layer, and I'm just going to throw something at it here. So let's say I put this under assembly notes and I press OK. And then I go back into the silk bottom here and I say edit layer. You'll notice that assembly is no longer here. So this list grows progressively smaller as you keep allocating these things out there. So it doesn't allow for a reuse of that particular special layer there, which kind of makes sense because then it'll really confuse it as to which layer it's supposed to be on. However, you may have noticed that there's a few things missing. So what they did was they said, okay, there are certain types of universal layers that are specific to one sheet, like your sheet itself or your Fab Notes or just the board outline. I don't need to have a top and a bottom board outline. I guess in theory I could have a top and the bottom Fab Notes, but most people just put it on one page. So what about those things like courtyard, 3D bodies, those type of things? So if we right click here and we do an edit layer, you'll see that the list that they provide here has other things that are specific to those things that would be actually on the top and on the bottom. Like a 3D body, for example, would be one of those things that we would want to have a top layer, something that's associated with the top layer and something that's associated with the bottom layer. Same thing with glue points or gold plating and coating and so on and so forth. So that's how Altium breaks it up. So in a sense, you may be forced to actually pair these things together if you're going to use these special layer types, simply because you wouldn't gain access to these universal layers unless they were paired together. So how does this all kind of come out in the wash? Well, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring up my global name. So I've brought in Rev1, and by the way, the view configuration is based on Rev1, and here is Rev2. But what I want to show you, so I'm going to split the screen again. Let's do a split here, vertical. And let's go into Rev2. So let's bring this over here and let's bring this one over here. And hopefully you can read these. I'm trying to make them big enough. I'm going to push this around so you guys can hopefully see this a little easier here. Okay, so notice that anything, and I type, by the way, I type these things in so we could match these up. Anything that you see in my text here, in parentheses, were these special layer types that I wanted to bring to your attention. So you see that because in here, when I say here, I'm talking about the PCB doc. Again, this is based on Rev1, matches up with what I have for Rev2. They stay on the same layer. Same thing with Rev, and same thing here with, let me see here. This, and again, I confuse myself very easily here. I'm on Rev2 over here. So remember, I'm looking at the library part versus what you see here. So here, for example, we had initially put this Fab Notes on layer 2 on Rev2, but now we're in the PCB doc, and notice it now says 03 PCB Notes because these were the Fab Notes, right? So the Fab Notes initially started on 2, but here in this document, they're actually on 3, where my cursor is here, so that's why it automatically moved me to 3. And so that you're going to kind of see those type of things as we go along here. Some of them matched up verbatim, like 04 matched up between Rev1 and Rev2. Here's an example of one. This was one that was started off in 5, and it got moved over to 16 because in my Rev2, 05 was dimensions. In my Rev1, 16 was my dimensions, and you can see that over here. What about MO3? So MO3 is a situation where I used assembly notes in Rev2, but I did not have assembly notes in Rev1. So what the system will do is it says, well, haha, you used a universal, you use one of these layer types as a universal. I've got to preserve that. So it actually created as mechanical 20. The one thing that I probably don't care about too much about these, again, I'm using that dot layer name thing. And when you use these special layer types here, it just tells you exactly what the layer type is. It's not necessarily telling you what mechanical layer it's been associated with here. So just be aware of that. These were never allocated, so whatever I had on these layers are now at the mercy of whatever was in Rev1. And that's what you see up here as well. So here's a situation where in Rev 1, or pardon me, yeah, so in Rev 2, we didn't allocate 9 or 10, but in Rev 1 they were actually allocated. So that's why you see that these have been given 3D body and top dimensions. So they're a little thrown off there. But the rest of them, like the assembly ones, matched up beautifully. So here they matched up. And so again, even though this one was 11, yeah, my assembly here now is 12. This one used to be 12, it's now 13, and so on and so forth. So the 13, the 14, the courtyard. So that's how these type of things work. They're definitely worth something to play with and try so you get a better feel for them. But they do a really good job of fixing these issues where you bring in the library from one thing and you've got something from another and you're trying to bring them in. Though I'll be perfectly honest with you, I think from the get-go you want to make sure these mechanical layers are right before you bring them in your PCB dock. But this at least can remedy some of those issues. The last thing I want to show you here, because I know I'm getting pressed for time a bit, is what's called the layer sets. So the layer sets got changed in 18, 19, and 20. 17, what you would do is you go to the bottom left corner over here, and if you clicked on the LS, you would get your layer sets. And the whole point of this is that you don't have to go in here and turn on and off eyeballs. Or if you hit the L key in 17 and prior, you would have to go in and you would turn things on and off, and then you would have to escape out of there. So this would just allow you to just grab certain things, right? So if you clicked on this, it would actually, let me split, merge all, so we're focusing on only this here. So here's my global name. So if I do, for example, only my signal layers here, nothing's going to show up because I have nothing on my signal layers here, but you'll notice at the bottom, all those other things got turned off, as opposed to me going here to all layers. So this is a really easy way of filtering out the layers you do and you don't want with, with a really quick click of a button. In 17 and prior, if you want to set up new layers, they had the feature to do it here, and they give you a little checklist, and you would add it in over here. That went away in 18, 19, and 20. So how do we do that? So what you do over here is you actually turn on and off what you want to be the layer. So let's say, for instance, I want all those things that are going to be on the top. So let's say I don't want, I'm going to close all these off for a moment, and I'm just going to turn on this one. And then for grins, I'm going to turn on, let's turn off all the mechanical layers. So I've got my top silk, not that I really have anything on my top silk. And let's say I would turn on my notes. And for grins, let me just turn on 04 just so we have something to look at over here. So let's say I've got this set up and I want to preserve this. Then all I need to do over here is I'm going to click on this little button that's got a plus sign. It's going to call it my layers. And so I'll call these things top layers PT, just so it doesn't interfere with anything else that might already be in there. And that's it. Now I've got this available to me here. Sometimes it may ask you to save it, but now I should be able to go into my LS here. Here's my top layers. So if I go into all layers, it turns them on. And if I go into my LS again, say top layers, it only turns on those here that are supposed to be turned on. If I want to view it from the bottom side, so if I want to do a reverse here, you can also turn this on and then save it, and it will flip those things over. And the best part is you can import and export these from one project to the next. So that's why they've got this down here. So with that, that is what I wanted to show you here in the time that I had. We have one more polling question for you, so I'll let that one be brought up. And just want to know if what I showed you today was relevant. All right, so appreciate that. I'm glad to see a lot of people, a good majority of you have found this relevant for what you need. And it doesn't surprise me that you found that the material was a bit overwhelming. I know I'm throwing a lot at you in a very small period of time. Obviously, we'll make this webinar available through a recording so you can slow me down a little bit. So, but thank you for the feedback. I do appreciate that. So I am going to talk a moment about 9.connects. And by the way, if you do have any questions, feel free to write those in. And I know that my colleague, Tom Cassidy, may have been answering some of those already for you. But if you don't mind, let me just talk a minute about 9.connects. You are definitely here for a reason. And that's because you want to know how to best manage the mechanical layers in Altium Designer. You know, why people ask us this very interesting question. They say, why are you giving this information away? They think we're giving away the farm. And to be perfectly honest with you, the reason we do this, there's really two reasons. Number one, we're not giving away much of the farm. Maybe we're giving away a shingle or two of the farm, but we're not giving away the whole farm here. This is just really one of many, many hours of information that we have that we're more than happy to share with you. But primarily the reason is because we want to show you that we have this knowledge. Obviously, we're a service and training company. How do you prove to your customers that you have this knowledge? We do this through our monthly webinars. That's really why we do this, and we're more than happy to give you 1 hour of our knowledge to prove that. So what does that mean to you? Well, one of the things, if you use us for services, I always want you to know it's more than a WYSIWYG, meaning what you see is what you get. It's not just one of these things, you give it to us, we do it exactly it is per the statement of work. Obviously, we're going to follow the statement of work, but we want you to come back saying, you know what, these guys really not only did what we wanted, they heard us out, they were able to help us through the problems, they were a partner in this. It wasn't one of these things we threw, it wasn't something we threw in and we just got something back and, well, this is what you told us what you wanted and now go away. It's nothing like that. We want you to be successful, and we're going to talk with you all the way through whatever project we are working with you on. And then the second part is when it comes to training. To me, there is training, and then there's the capital training. And what I mean by lowercase training is the training that you're going to find out there through webinars and through basically YouTube videos and other things that people are going to put out there. And the thing that we find with this is it's great. And if you have the time and, let's say more importantly, the willpower to go through all those things, because obviously there's a lot of distractions, then all the power to you. I mean, it's free. And that's one of the cool things about the internet and YouTube and all these other good things out there. There's a lot of great free material out there. But if you're anything like me, there is a lot to be done and a little time to do it. And in addition to that, I want to make sure I'm doing it right. And that's where our, what I'll call capital training is coming in. And what that is that when you come to us seeking training, we want to work around your schedule. So there's different ways we can do that. And number two is not just showing you how to use a tool. Anybody can show you how to use the tool. We want to make sure that we're using the tool that best works within the process that you have or need. And in fact, one of the things that we've noticed this past year is we've done far more private trainings than we have done public trainings. And public trainings are great, but we really, really like the private trainings. Number one, they're not much more expensive than the public trainings, almost back to the same cost. But secondly, when we do a private training, you have our full attention. We can look at your processes and we can talk about things above and beyond what's just in our manuals. So there's a power when it comes to what I'll call this capital training. So, just remember, we've walked a mile in your shoes, and we want to walk you through the process, not just a tool. And of course, your needs in the training. So for more information, feel free to check us out at 9.connects. More than happy to field your questions. Give Christopher Cachet a call. There's never any pressure. We want to make sure that you're getting what you need done. If we think it's one of those things you can do on your own, we'll point you in the right direction. If there's something we can assist you with, we'll offer you our services. That's how we work here at 9.connects. I want to thank everybody for joining us here today. It's been a really great year. And we look forward to providing these webinars again in 2020.